And we are live on the Gamification Revolution. I'm your host, Gabe Zickerman. Welcome, everybody. It's an overcast but nicely cool day in New York City. And I'm joined today by our guest, Bob Marsh, who's coming to us from the lovely, recently bankrupt, but nonetheless on the mend city of Detroit. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Gabe. Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have you and great to have everyone here. Just remember, if you're watching this live, you need to log in with one of your social media accounts, and then you can click one of these buttons that you see somewhere on the screen. I don't know on your screen what they look like because they're different in every browser. Click one of those buttons to ask us a question. You can submit a question in chat through the message queue, or you can also join us on camera. If you've got a camera, webcam on your computer, I'll bring you live online and you can ask Bob or I any questions about employee engagement, gamification, anything that's on your mind today for the 30 minutes. For those of you joining us via podcast or watching this as a repeat, sorry you can't ask questions, but you can follow me on Twitter at @GZakerm and Bob at LevelEleven. And in the meantime, I want to encourage everybody to of course check out all the great content around this subject on gamification.co. So Bob, let's jump in with you. You are a seasoned long-term sales executive. You've led big teams. Your previous work at ePrize, you were kind of like the big sales guy, and you left ePrize to help start a new company called LevelEleven, which is focused on engaging salespeople using gamification through the Salesforce paradigm. I want to talk about that, but first a question for you. Why isn't it enough just to give salespeople commission-based comp to get them to do what you need them to do? Why do we need anything beyond commission?
Yeah, great question. So commission is the commission structure, bonus structure. I mean, that's really important. And there's different opinions on this, but mine is it's not going away. You want to be compensating and rewarding salespeople for the end result that you want out of them, which is sales. And so I think a lot of people wish there were actually more positions that would tie themselves to the ultimate result, like salespeople do. And so salespeople are very focused on what the result is that you want to get out of them. They are very outcome focused. And that's kind of the ultimate way to measure. So someone might be doing a great job of, they make a lot of calls, they're really nice on the phone, they seem to be persuasive, but if they can't do that final conversion, it really doesn't matter, and that's the most important end thing. So anyway, that's an important element, and it shouldn't go away. However, the reason that engagement and competition and gamification and all these ideas is so important and really, I think, critical is that as a manager, you always need something to get people focused or nudged in a certain direction. And a great evidence of that is that over for the last like 50, 100 years, companies have been running just your boring old sales contest. Like 50% of sales organizations run a contest on a regular basis, 50%. And they're managed off of.
Give us an example of what's the sales contest.
Yeah, so your standard sales contest is who can sell the most stuff this month. That is the most basic, simple thing. And whoever's at the top of that leaderboard, in addition to their commissions and their bonuses, we're going to give them a trip. We're going to give them a weekend or whatever it might be. And it's a straight, like, tracked on a whiteboard, tracked on a chalkboard, on an Excel spreadsheet. This incredibly manual process that generally people hate because it's such a pain, but the manager loves it because it works. Salespeople are incredibly competitive human beings. And a lot of people are, but like you tend to have a high group of very competitive people there, and that kind of stuff works. So back to your question, like the reason that you need it is a manager. Like the number one challenge, there's research that supports this. The number one challenge that any sales manager faces is how do I make sure that my people are focused on the things that are going to yield them the best results? And it seems like, to your question, like, well, why wouldn't a salesperson want to do that anyway? And the thing is that they do, but a manager is always trying to coach and encourage around certain things. And so the idea of competitions, gamification is a way to draw a little bit extra attention around the behavior you need.
So, but doesn't this just end up being kind of like a constant never-ending competition thing? And of course, the question that then gets asked is, then are any of them significant? I mean, I'll tell you my personal story, Bob. My father worked in a call center for many years at Air Canada and sales call center. And he was constantly doing these contests and, was very good at them. And I remember we, of course, enjoyed the spoils of many of his wins. But I hear that from a lot of call center folks, and as you described, there's a kind of constant culture of these sales contests. So don't they just blur into one big mass anyway? Does anyone even pay attention to contests?
Yeah, it can. And so, despite the what would seem like, for us, because that's a lot of the core of what our product is about. But I mean, I personally don't believe. I mean, you shouldn't have a contest running constantly at the same people. So, the same people, you may run, a little bit of something that is around some behavior, this month, another one next month or whatever. But I think it's actually important to be, you want to be a little bit careful about it. But, you could be running something once a month over the course of a week or whatever it might be. I mean, our own team, I mean, we eat our own medicine. Like, we run a daily contest around, prospecting and making calls. And so the idea is to create energy and focus, and it gets everyone rallied and their name up in lights. So it encourages them to focus on it. But I agree. I mean, you have to be. It doesn't cover up a core issue. Like if your people are not prospecting consistently or they're not doing the right behaviors, you still need to coach and motivate that. But the idea is that a competition just drives more attention and lift around it. I'll give you a great example. I was in Chicago a couple days ago, and I was talking to the VP of sales at a Morningstar, a big financial company. And so they were trying to encourage their reps, like, you got to go have more demos. You got to demo this new product that we have coming out. And so, a lot of people were doing it, and they were averaging, whatever it was, like 40 demos a month or something across the team on this product. And I said, well, let's create more attention. Let's create a little competition, a leaderboard around it. So the month that they did that, the demos went up to like 150 or something like that, 140, whatever the number was. So skyrocket. And so one of the reasons for that is that it created a conversation around this behavior. So you had some people saying, hey, why am I at the bottom of that leaderboard? I didn't think I had to pitch that. And then it's like, oh, well, wait a minute. No, actually you should. Let's talk about this. And then the person said, oh, now it helps me better understand what's expected of me in my job. You also had like the general manager around and say, hey, hey, everyone, way to go to the top people. Those at the bottom, like, hey, let's get a little more rallied around this. And all of a sudden there's all this attention. So the best part though is after it was over, so despite they had the great spike, after it was over, the next month when there wasn't a competition going on, they went up to around 50 to 60 a month. So they just doubled. They went from 40 to 40 demos a month to 50 to 60. So a 50% spike, even when the contest was over, because that contest, that month, created the conversation, created more focus, and changed people's behaviors for the long term.
Got it. So the key is to use big, bright, shiny objects like the contest as the catalyst for this conversation. But ultimately, you're saying that coaching behavior's got to be there. The scaffolding, just like a teacher would have to do, has got to be there to go alongside that to be effective.
Yeah, and so the point is, and this is kind of where we see success in our business, is that there's always something. Like Gabe, there's always something. Like there's always something you need to get a group of people focused around. And so it's not always a one size fits all for the entire sales organization. You might point it at a group of like 5 or 10 people, because there's always something you need some group of people focused on. And exactly to your point, I've got many other stories like that where it changed somebody for a short period of time and then ultimately changed them for the long run. And that was just, again, to your point, the catalyst.
So do you think there's this interesting question from Sasha, who you may or may not have met at G Summit this past April in San Francisco. Sasha from McKinsey, thanks for being here, Sasha. So he's asking about the definition of a good salesperson. And I imagine that his question cuts to the heart a little bit of your view of the world, Bob. But he asks whether or not a good salesperson is really about meeting customer needs rather than about sales. And maybe a different way to frame the question, do you think we're sometimes metrics oriented management, like we have a great deal of in sales? Do you think it kind of misses the point?
No, so Sash, that's an excellent question. So, I mean, the part of it is like the best salespeople do exactly what you're saying. The very best salespeople are very engaging. They're looking out for the customer's needs. They genuinely care and want to help that person. And to me, one of the best signals of a great salesperson, and I remember coming to this realization myself, was that you're comfortable telling someone, you know what, you should not buy our product. What you need, now that I learned more about you, you don't need what we have, you need to go look at this. And so the point is that the best salespeople will act like that because they genuinely want to help people. They end up being the best salesperson. So if you look at, So the second part of your question, instead of the one who makes the most sales, I don't think it's an instead. I think they correlate together. The salespeople who genuinely care about their customers and are looking out for their best interests and are willing to push back, are willing to say, hey, I'm not right for you, are generally the people who are going to be the best in sales. So that's that part. The other part is, so which I think is a little bit of a expected part of the question is, there's no question, like the best salespeople are ranked by who can sell the most. And what I'm saying is that I think that the people who are going to sell the most are the ones who genuinely care about people. Those who don't, it's going to catch up with them, and they're not ultimately going to stay at the top of that list for very long.
So this is more complicated than it seems at first, right? People who might throw out the idea that you can just simply set up a great commission structure. I mean, when people sit around and think about changing behavior of employees, usually the sales team seems straightforward because it's like just give them some money, right? So tell us, Bob, just tell us now as we're talking about it, what is LevelEleven and why does it exist? Why did you feel so strongly that you needed to sort of bring LevelEleven to the world?
Yeah, so LevelEleven is an enterprise software application. So it's used by VPs of sales at companies like Comcast and Morningstar and OpenTable and Detroit Pistons and kind of on and on. And so what these companies are doing is, with the VP sales challenges and some of the things we talked about is that they're looking for, there always are initiatives that they're trying to drive across the organization. It might be, we need to take this product to market, and it's really important. We need people to kind of focus on this new sales process that we're rolling out because we think it'll impact the business. We need people to adopt and use, their CRM system like Salesforce better. And so they're always looking for, how do I engage my team and build excitement and energy around those things? And so what our business does is we use the concept of competition and leaderboards to help rally and get people focused around those behaviors. So again, the application we have is called Compete, rightfully so. And what it does, it allows the manager to go through and pinpoint what's the behavior you want your team focused around, and allow them to deploy competition around that specific behavior on demand. And so we've made this thing like pretty easy that you can put it in the hands of the field sales manager. Our joke is, hey, it's so easy, even a sales manager can do it. And the idea is that there's a lot of technology tools out there that are designed in a way that you got to have an IT person or an operations person do it. But it's really, and I knew this because this was me, right? Like, if you're a field sales manager managing a group of people, like, what you need out of those 20, 30 people on your team. So it enables someone to do that on a more local basis. So the reason that I did this, so when I was at ePrize, I had rolled out our CRM system, which was in Salesforce.com, for about a 125 person sales organization. And after I did that, I said, okay, this is great. Like, we've got all this incredibly powerful engine in Salesforce. We can now measure all this data. I see that, our salespeople are getting meetings, and, but then I'm thinking, well, all right, well, now what? Like, I've got this data, so what? How do I use it to drive behavior and change, which is why, me as a manager, that's what I ultimately wanted. I was buying into this vision that if I can measure what's happening in the sales organization, because I have Salesforce, ultimately I can motivate it, right? If I can measure it, I can motivate it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't seeing that happening. And so I said, well, gosh, what if we had a way to allow the manager, on demand to say, here's the behavior I want to drive, and then create leaderboards and competition around it. So, I did it because I saw this, that was a challenge I know all managers face. I saw the fact that, the idea of a sales contest, and by the way, like, I didn't run a lot of these when I was a manager, largely because they were a giant pain in the neck. They were very hard to manage. I'm like, how do you get the data? And I don't need to be on sales because we're already paying people for sales. So how do I track it? Now I had a system to track it. So that's where I started to see the opportunity.
Well, and I think so. This is super interesting, and actually, I want to talk some more about that. And we have some questions queued up, but I want to remind everybody they can check out LevelEleven at leveleleven.com. They can follow you at BobMarsh5, right, on Twitter. And also, of course, for those of you who don't already have it, my newest book, The Gamification Revolution, is out. You can find out more about that at GamRev, and we talk about lots of examples of how to use it in a context like sales and like managing employees. A really interesting read for all of you interested in the subject. So I want to just pull on one particular thread, Bob, of what you just talked about, and dig into this a little bit deeper. So all of these tools exist, right? In particular, so you've got the great LevelEleven. It exists. Other tools exist to help managers drive better performance out of their teams. But it seems like that's a kind of last mile problem in a way, right? That you can deploy all these amazing tools to the enterprise, but if people don't use it, if the managers don't use it to drive behavior, if they don't actually use that gamified system to get people to do things, if employees aren't using the gamified CRM or the infrastructure to actually record their behavior or engage with the system, we don't really get the results that we need. What's your personal experience with getting that management team, like distributed sales managers or field sales managers, to use LevelEleven? What are some of the challenges and how do you overcome that barrier?
Yeah, so this is a huge and very well-known problem. So I think the research talks about like 70% of CRM implementations fail because of lack of user engagement. And so, what we see, so I mean, we write a lot about this. Like we have a very active blog. We've got white papers about it. We've got even more coming out here shortly um, about the importance of driving that adoption, because ultimately that's the, like I said earlier, when someone implements a CRM system like a Salesforce, they're buying into that vision of I can measure it, I can motivate it. But if the stuff's not being put in, then it's kind of a useless. It's like a high performance vehicle locked in a position, right? Like you
Right.
can't get out of it what it's capable of. And so the very first thing, and like we don't alone solve that bigger problem, but we can help it along the way. So one of the things that I've seen is that you need to kind of break it down. You need to talk to the managers and understand, okay, what are the most important metrics that you want to be able to measure within your team, and keep it really simple. Like I did this myself, so I've made the mistake that you can measure anything in these CRM systems, but the problem is that don't try to though. Like just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
So try to break things down and say, what are the like two things that you really want to get measurement around, and just get people rallied around that as like you're dipping your toe in the water. And then when you do that, like make it things that the end user will find value in. And so where we then come in is where I highly recommend it, is to say, hey, we're rolling out Salesforce, and everyone's like, oh God, I got to enter all this stuff in
Right.
the system.
Right.
Make it a little more fun, like add some engagement to it. Like this is kind of where we pop in to say, hey, I want everyone to start logging their meetings so you'll have better history of of your conversations with your clients. Like put that in Salesforce, and we can measure like, hey, why is this person getting a lot of meetings, this person's not? Let's kind of coach and control them around it. And then when you add a little comment and say, hey, by the way, whoever gets the most meetings this month is going to get a prize, or you'll be on this leaderboard. Like it just makes that whole process a lot more interesting and can really spike that performance fast, instead of just trying to do it on your own and hope that you're going to inspire people by yourself.
Right. Hope that it just works out. And actually, slightly tangential to that, but I think it's a sort of interesting question. Wilhelmine, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Thanks for asking. Asks us, do we have any experience with this sort of modality in education? And I want to kind of put that in your sort of frame of reference, Bob. It sounds like lots of the reasons why you do this contest-driven activity with LevelEleven is as a kind of educational project, really, to get the sales reps thinking about new ways of interacting. Do you ever do this, or have you had any context or experience with how we might use this to educate these teams on new products and services rather than on process?
Yeah, we have some pretty cool stories about this. So and this has been a pretty popular use case actually, Gabe. So one of our clients is the Detroit Pistons, and so we've got a couple examples like this, but they've encouraged us to share this story. So they had rolled out a new product, and it's not uncommon, and I face this myself. The company spends all this money creating a new product and all the marketing and everything that goes with it, and then the salespeople are like, okay, that's really cool, like, and they wait for someone else to sell it. They're like, I don't want to be the first one to sell it. Like, what kind of objections am I going to face? And how much does it cost? And what if they say it's too much? And like, how do I deal with that? And so people wait for other ones. And so what the Pistons did is they said, well, why don't we create a little competition around it, because that will publicly display and recognize the people who are doing it. And so they put those leaderboards out there. And what happened is that people started bubbling up to the top. And then there was a bunch of people, of course, that were at the bottom. And so back to your original point about commissions and why isn't that enough, what happened is someone said, well, all right, I might not win this thing, but somebody's selling a product that I'm not selling, and it's working. And so what they did is those people started going to their peers all by themselves, like not because their manager said to go do it or coordinated some session. All by themselves, they got up, walked over to their peer and said, hey, I noticed that you're doing well in this thing, and this is all about this new product. Tell me how you're selling it. Tell me how you're pitching it. help me do this. Like, what would you suggest to me? And so, that's a great way that the education to make it really genuine, that people are sharing it with each other. We had another case recently where a salesperson found themselves at the bottom of the leaderboard, and it was their final realization. They're like, all right, I got to change something here, because if I don't change something, my job's not going to last very long. And that motivated them to come to their manager and say, okay, can you coach me? And like, what am I doing? What am I not doing correctly? Because I want to fix it. Because like, I don't like that position on that board. And it literally turned that person's career around. Like, it sometimes shocked me. I'm like, are you serious? Did it actually do that? And it actually did. And so sometimes this stuff encourages people to maybe go do a little learning all by themselves.
I think that's a very interesting sort of point about this, right? And thanks very much, Wilhelmine, for the question. It's a very interesting point about how some of these techniques are actually maybe more catalysts rather than the end in and of themselves. And particularly, do you have any thoughts about how, salespeople are generally thought of as being, fairly independent kinds of people, or at least we select for a more independently minded, self-starting, low sort of low fear of rejection kind of person to be successful in sales. How do you think some of those things some of the examples or experiences you've had with LevelEleven and in getting people to engage around these issues, how do you think that might translate to a more general worker? So someone who's not quite as salesy, let's say.
Yeah. Well, so one thing I'd say is that, again, almost going back to Sasha's question, like some of the best people, like they want to help other people, and they also are humble enough that they're open-minded and they want to go find more coaching and ideas. So I'm definitely hearing more and more stories of world-class sales organizations that the reason that they're world-class is because there's so much collaboration. So, definitely like one of the traits of salespeople is they can work independently, they're self-starters, and those are excellent traits you're looking for. But more and more people there's all these tools to drive collaboration that makes a difference. And so, but anyway, in other parts of the organizations, like the idea, like to your point, we've seen that happen like outside of a sales team, that they're just encouraging people to collaborate more with each other, share some ideas, and that we're definitely seeing that work. It is not just about salespeople.
Just about the sales, right? And of course, and I want to now bring on a video question. Hi, Serge.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
How are you?
Hi, sir.
Good.
Yes, we can hear you just fine. So
Great.
I saw a little bit. What's your question?
So my question is, if we take gamification down the road that it's currently heading, where everything is being gamified and in a lot of aspects it's really great. I've heard this concern from some, future thinkers. What happens when we live in a world where everything is gamified, and what happens to the personal ethics? In a world where I'm getting rewarded for being nice to a stranger on the street or helping an old lady cross the road, what happens to, I don't want to say morality, but what happens to morality when that happens?
Well, look, I think it's a really interesting question. So, Bob, let's put it in your prism inside an organization where some of these behaviors are happening on their own before you introduce the system, and now, what effect do you think that will have on the future of, let's call it broadly speaking, the ethical behavior of people inside an organization?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. So, I mean, one of the things that so if you do forecast out, so people are doing this all the time, and all of a sudden it just becomes the norm, like it'd be a challenge. Although I don't see a lot of times in history where that ended up being the case, where something became so pervasive that all of a sudden it lost its attention. So I don't know that that would actually happen. It's interesting to think about. I don't know that it actually would. But one thing that I can tell you is a little bit of evidence of this is that we see that if you think about the context of a competition, which is some of the stuff that I've talked about and I've seen really work, is that some of the highest performing programs we've seen either didn't have an incentive at all, or the prize or reward was really small. And what that shows is that people are motivated by just the idea of like, how am I doing compared to my peers?
Progress.
Like, help me understand, like, how am I doing? Like, am I any good? Like, am I, what can I learn from other people, et cetera, and just kind of where do I stand? And so it's not that they're trying to game anything because they're trying to like get some prize. They just actually want feedback. And so this becomes a method in which to deliver that feedback. So And then if it's genuine like that, then it doesn't, it minimizes someone saying, I'm going to try to, take make some weird, do some weird, like unethical thing
Sure.
in order to get a reward.
I would add also
Go ahead.
from my perspective, Serge, on that is that one interesting thing we always talk about in designing gamified experiences is that the reward for something that's kind of altruistic, or the design when you're trying to wrap something around an altruistic behavior, needs to look different from the design when you're wrapping something around a commercial behavior, because altruism and commerce are different. So if we were trying to apply some gamification principles to something like altruism, like helping somebody across the street, we wouldn't try to introduce a cash incentive to that.
Oh, of course not.
We definitely wouldn't do that.
Of course not.
It would produce, there's no upside to those sorts of results. So part of this is about, a sort of broad kind of question, and part of it is, really about matching the design to the requirement. Thanks for coming on, Serge. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks,
So
Serge.
Bob, this is let me take this question in a different direction. Serge's very interesting question. So companies, there's all this sort of pushback about the manipulative or control elements of some of the things that we might be designing for, as it relates to employee engagement and driving salespeople's behavior. And one thing that seems fairly obvious is that salespeople are more accustomed to the intrusion of stats, bottom line numbers, calculus to determine outcomes than, let's say, an engineer working in a design studio who's not really accustomed to that, whereas salespeople are accustomed to it anyway. What do you think about the sort of data analysis questions, how workers will react to this increasingly encroaching data piece of gamification that, for example, companies like LevelEleven, must advocate for in order to make the system work?
So just to clarify, so do you mean how do you use all this data that is?
Yeah, having all this behavior tracked, right? Because part of it is we're increasing the amount of behaviors that have to be tracked in order to make something work. We're not saying sales are, just bottom line revenue is not enough. Now we're going to be tracking all this other stuff. Salespeople are more comfortable with being tracked, I think, in general, though I'm happy to hear your opinion on that. What about people who are not used to being tracked in their jobs at all today? What will happen as we start bringing these tracking tools into their world in order to deliver, engagement systems like the kind that you provide?
I see it. Okay, thank you for clarifying. So I actually believe, Gabe, that I think most people, particularly workers, like they want measurement because like to the point earlier, that people want to know, like, how am I doing? Like, think about one of the things that Jack Welch talked about, this former CEO of General Electric, about how people, if they're not measured, they don't know how they're doing, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, someone gets fired from their job. Like, well, you're not doing, what you needed. And they're like, well, what do you mean?
Right.
Like, that's the cruelest thing that you can do to somebody. And so the best way to set expectations and help people and make sure they know what they're doing is to measure them somehow. And so the very best managers out there will figure out some mechanism, some way to measure and objectify performance. Now, it can't always be about just the numbers. There's some subjective elements to it, but I believe that any worker wants to be measured in some way so that they can get an understanding of how am I doing, how do I get better, how do I compare to my peers, so that I keep refining myself. And so for those who don't, like, that's a different issue. But I believe that a lot of people actually desire that. And now there's tools that finally allow a company to offer that kind of measurement and feedback.
So it sounds like you're saying it's got to be authentic and designed in a way that feels constructive rather than potentially, abusive. And I think this dovetails well into Justin's question. Thanks for this question, Dustin, which is about how you design your leaderboards at LevelEleven to be to show progress and to talk about intrinsic motivation. We don't have any visuals easily available to share, but can you talk to a little bit of how you might design those, or how you might represent those leaderboards to be less confrontational or less oppressive?
Yeah, I mean, it is, we do these like pretty straightforward. I mean, it's a stack rank leaderboard. It kind of shows how everyone's doing. But then what we do is we also break down into the details, like, okay, here's this individual user, here's how they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And then also we do a little something that has been pretty powerful, which is not just how far are you away from the person in the lead, how far are you away from the person in front of you? Because in many cases, someone might say, all right, I mean, I'm fine with it. Like, I'm not going to win this thing, but maybe I can at least try to make a little bit of leg up on the person in front of me. And so, we've seen that stuff. Oh, there you go. We've seen that stuff be pretty compelling and that kind of work. And so part of what we do is, this is the leaderboard that we have, right inside of Salesforce. But, we believe that, we're trying to essentially surround the salespeople with like these standings and updates on where they are. So, we're putting them on, we can put them up on big screen monitors around the office. They get an email in the morning, lets them know where they stand. In a few weeks, we're coming out with a mobile app version. So a salesperson's out on the road or at home, they can pull up the leaderboard there. So again, you're just trying to, the purpose is to create energy and attention around some behavior or initiative. And so therefore, we try to surround the person with that in many different places.
Well, fantastic. So very interesting, Bob. And of course, we got that leaderboard for those of you to see. Thanks for putting that up, Ivan. I want to thank all of you for being here, especially you, Bob. You can follow Bob at BobMarsh5 on Twitter and LevelEleven.com, of course. And for those of you who are interested, you can check out my new book, The Gamification Revolution. We talk about lots of issues like LevelElevens and lots of ideas around how to engage employees and consumers in the Gamification Revolution, which happens to be the name of the book. Again, from Detroit, thanks so very much for being with us, Bob.
Thank you, Gabe.
Awesome to have you as always. And thank all of you for joining us here on the Gamification Revolution. I'm your host, Gabe Zuckerman. We'll be back with you next week with another dose of great engagement to energize your brain and thinking about how you structure your organizations and consumer relationships. In the meantime, everyone, keep having fun. See you soon.